Have you ever thought about what you would do if you found someone broken in the middle of the road, alone, without hope, on the worst day of their life? I had never imagined going through this until that night, when the truck's headlights cut through the fog and rain, and there she was, a young woman, soaked, in a torn wedding dress, standing on the shoulder of the road as if the world had ended. Nothing seemed normal in that scenario. The wet asphalt, the sound of water hitting the roof of the cabin, and that tense silence that takes over when life demands an immediate decision. One look was enough to realize that something serious had happened. A mixture of fear, doubt, and responsibility took over me before I even got out of the driver's seat. I didn't know who that girl was, or what had made her end up like that, but I understood that my reaction could change everything. As I pulled over there on the shoulder, the rain beating down on the windshield, all that was going through my head was how much that road knew my life. But for you to understand how I got to this point, I need to go back to the beginning. My name is Mark Wilson. I have been a truck driver for 24 years. It wasn't a childhood choice, but it was what remained after my family fell apart. I started early at 18, working for a small trucking company in St. Paul, Minnesota. My father was a mechanic and always said that the road was a place for those who needed to think in silence. I've never forgotten that phrase. Maybe that's why I've gotten used to the noise of the engine, the roar of the diesel, and the voices on the radio that, after so many years, seem like the only real company during the late nights. On that particular night, February 23rd, 2022, I was at mile 126 on Highway 2, heading toward Grand Forks. I was due to deliver a load of farm equipment at 7 in the morning, nothing out of the ordinary for someone who has been driving this route for so long. But each trip like this always has some detail that sticks in my mind, whether it's the smell of reheated coffee in a styrofoam cup or the country music playing on a loop on my Bluetooth because the radio signal always drops out after Devil's Lake. I had been on the road for the past 8 days. I've lost count of the number of times I've driven over 1,000 miles with no one to talk to, just hearing my own breathing mixed with the radio's hiss. On the dashboard, old photos. One of my daughter, Lauren, 9 years old, on a picnic near the lake in Fargo. Another of my mother, taken before she got sick. These images accompanied me at every turn, at every stop. It wasn't a big family. My ex-wife and I spoke very little, only to arrange dates for visits or to discuss the bills left over from the divorce. Deep down, it was the loneliness that weighed most heavily. The routine of a truck driver doesn't forgive those who miss me. The earphones in my ears to hear a "Good night, Dad" on speakerphone make a difference, but there are rare days when the connection doesn't drop. The truth is that the road became a refuge, but also a punishment, especially on dates that no one remembers. Birthdays, Christmas, New Year's Eve. Holidays spent hitchhiking, cold snacks, and automatic messages from the bank for company. It was the life I had chosen to continue after I lost what mattered most. The truck cabin is my world. Every object there has a meaning. An emergency flashlight my father gave me, my grandfather's old pocket knife, even a faded plaid blanket that, surprisingly, still warms up better than any of these new heaters. The PX radio is like a direct line to others who also drive through the night. Quick conversation, not always cordial, but useful to know where the road is blocked, where there is a checkpoint, or if someone needs help. The life of a truck driver demands attention. A tachograph ticking every 6 hours, a speed limit monitored by GPS, and the responsibility of carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in the trunk. There is no room for distraction or error. That is why each night has its own rhythm. Calculated stops, fuel counted, sleep monitored at each gas station. That night, I confess that I wasn't expecting anything other than the usual tiredness. The dashboard showed a temperature of -4 degrees, and the windshield wipers were no longer able to cope with the amount of water. I was thinking about where I would make my next stop when, without warning, I saw that white silhouette in the middle of the road. Time stopped for a second. My routine, made up of exact repetitions and absolute safety, suddenly turned into doubt. The kind of doubt that only those who have spent sleepless nights understand. I had to decide quickly. Step on the brake, turn on the hazard lights, and ask myself, who was that person? And why did they look so destroyed in that place, at that time? Little did I know that that night was just beginning. That silhouette in the middle of the asphalt made no sense. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a parked car. I slowed down until I almost stopped and pulled over to the shoulder. The headlights hit her face. For a second, I thought I was having some kind of hallucination caused by fatigue. But she was there, a young woman, pale skin, hair stuck to her face because of the rain, a torn wedding dress, her arms covered in red marks, barefoot, walking slowly, as if each step took an immense effort. Her dress, which must have once been white, was covered in mud, torn at the knee, and you could see her swollen ankle. She had no purse, no cell phone, nothing in her hands. I stood for a few seconds without even touching the steering wheel. The doubt came to me. Should I stop, or should I keep going? Any truck driver has heard dozens of stories of scams on the road, people asking for help and then robbing them, setting up ambushes. But nothing there seemed set up. She looked straight at me, a little lost, and it was a look that no one fakes. It was the look of someone who has been left behind, of someone who is at the limit. The dashboard read 4 degrees below zero. I thought quickly. If I kept going, that girl might not last until the next car. If I stopped, I could get into trouble. In the end, the decision was made without thinking. I turned on the hazard lights, pulled the handbrake and got out of the cab with my jacket in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The rain was freezing and the wind was biting. She stood there, arms crossed, trying to protect herself. I approached her calmly. "Is everything okay? Are you hurt?" She didn't answer, just shook her head slowly. I noticed that she was shaking from head to toe. It wasn't just cold, it was panic. I held out my coat and she took it, without looking at me. I pointed to the cabin. "Get in! It's going to be freezing out there." She hesitated, but she was so weak that she just got in. I sat in the driver's seat, left the engine running, turned on the heater, and just stood there watching, waiting for someone to say something. She looked at the ground, pulled her legs close to her body, still without saying anything. She spent a while just breathing quickly, holding back her tears. Her torn dress revealed small cuts, fresh bruises. This wasn't an accident. It was an escape. I left a bottle of water in front of her, a protein bar, and remained silent. My PX radio was still crackling, with truckers talking about a checkpoint some 30 kilometers ahead. But inside, there was only that tense silence and a mix of curiosity and fear of what would come next. At that moment, I realized that choice, to stop the truck and let her in, was not a small one. That decision would change not only that night, but 2 lives at once. I closed the truck door, the warm air from the heater blowing directly on her face, and she remained motionless, clutching my coat as if it were the only thing safe in this strange world. I spread out a heavy blanket, which I always keep there for cold nights on the roads between Missouri and Kansas, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She kept her eyes on the ground, her knuckles white. I grabbed another bottle of water, opened it slowly, and set it down next to her, along with a simple sandwich, whole wheat bread, cheese, and ham, that I had bought at the last gas station in Emporia 2 hours earlier. I didn't know if she was hungry, but apparently hunger was the least of her problems that night. I sat back in the driver's seat, turned the radio down as low as possible, just to keep the silence from becoming overwhelming. I didn't want to scare her. I didn't want to pressure her. So the questions came quietly, one at a time. "What's your name?" Nothing. She just closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, as if she had to gather the courage to say anything. I tried again, calmer. "Can you tell me if you're hurt? Do you need to go to the hospital?" She shook her head weakly, indicating that she didn't need a doctor. I noticed that her hands were shaking, but it wasn't just cold. It was the kind of shaking that comes from fear, from exhaustion. I took a microfiber towel out of the toolbox and offered it to her to dry her face, but she didn't move. I started talking about trivial things, telling her about the bad traffic near Wichita, the checkpoint on the interstate, the hours I'd been driving since Springfield. In the rearview mirror, I saw her dress stuck to her skin, her feet cut, a bit of dried blood on her ankle. I had a first aid kit behind the seat. I opened it slowly, took out some antiseptic ointment and band-aids, and left everything ready, hoping she would accept it or at least look at me. Nothing. The clock on the dashboard read 2:42 in the morning. The windshield wipers kept up their rhythm, their rhythmic noise trying to disguise the still tension inside the cabin. Sometimes she glanced quickly at the window, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. That made me think that maybe she was running away from someone, and not just from a place. Every now and then, she would venture a random sentence without insisting. "Is there anyone I can tell? Family? Friends?" The silence continued. I tried to change the subject, commenting on the trucker's favorite stops, the bitter coffee at the Diamond gas station, just to see if I could get a smile, but she didn't even move her mouth. I noticed the detail of a thin gold ring on her finger, half crooked, half stuck, with the mark of where it had already been hurriedly torn off. That said more than any words. I left the subject open, hoping that when she was ready, she would speak. Little by little, she began to settle down, exchanging the trembling of fear for extreme tiredness. She rested her head against the glass and stood there, her eyes open, looking at the darkness outside, as if she was still trying to understand where she was. I remained attentive, with my hand always close to the first aid kit, and my head full of questions that I didn't have the courage to ask. I didn't want to break the little bit of security that she seemed to have found there. Time passed slowly. The truck's dashboard showed 3 hours and 16 minutes when I heard the first word come out of her mouth. A whisper, almost muffled. Lauren. That was it. He didn't tell me where he came from, or why he was there, or who he was running from. Just Lauren, in that broken voice of someone who had already cried all he could cry. I answered in the same way, without pressure. I'm Mark. You're safe here. I didn't ask any more questions. I just made it clear that I could trust her, that nothing would happen in there without her wanting it to. In that silence, full of unanswered questions, it was clear that all I wanted to know was who that girl was, and why she was there, in the middle of the road, on that impossible night. The silence inside the cabin seemed to stretch for miles, interrupted only by the steady sound of rain hitting the windshield and the distant crunch of tires sinking into the mud on the shoulder. I didn't know how long we stood there, but I felt there was no point in trying to rush things. I glanced at Lauren every now and then, waiting for some movement, some word that would give me a clue as to what she needed. It wasn't until the clock passed 4 that she stirred, pulled the blanket closer, and for the first time looked up at me for real. Her mouth was trembling, her voice was choked, and her first words didn't come out in complete sentences. They were just a string of fragments, as if she was afraid to even form the story. I was left there, in front of everyone, dressed in white, music playing, and he was laughing, along with his friends. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she wasn't really crying. It was that silent cry that stays inside and weighs on every word. He said that I was never enough, that no one really wanted me, and then he just walked away, leaving me alone in the church. Time seemed to have stopped there. Lauren tried to continue, her trembling hands clutching the hem of her dress, and I remained quiet, listening to every detail, trying to understand the pain without intruding too much. She continued, now with a little more voice. I ran out into the street, barefoot. I don't even remember how I got here. I just wanted to disappear. I just wanted it to end. The image of a bride running away through the empty streets in the middle of the night was too strong for anyone who had ever felt the weight of abandonment. People watched, but no one helped. No one said anything. They just watched. I let her speak, without interrupting, without asking any more questions. I just listened, because I realized that each sentence was a small victory against the silence that had been crushing her since that closed church door. At one point, she clutched the handkerchief I had left, drying the tears that were falling slowly, almost without force. We remained in silence for a few more minutes. I knew that nothing I said could change her past, but I also knew that this was where any chance of rebuilding began. I spoke softly, the way I usually do when I see someone on edge. Lauren, no one is prepared for a blow like that, and you're not broken. You're just bruised. That doesn't define who you are. There's nothing wrong with you. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and looked more tired than ever. But I could tell I had managed to lift some of that weight off her shoulders, even if it was just for a few seconds. I made it clear that she could stay there as long as she needed. The truck was safe, and there was no rush to get out or respond to anything. Deep down, I felt a growing sense of indignation. No one deserves this kind of humiliation. No one deserves to be discarded like an object. I was sure of one thing. I wasn't going to let it end there. It wasn't going to be just another story of tragedy lost on some empty road. Something inside me told me that tonight was just the beginning of what life had in store for Lauren, and one way or another, I was determined to help. We pulled off the road at the first flashing yellow light on the Rosewood Diner sign. It was almost 5 in the morning when I parked the 40-foot truck next to the restaurant. in one of those gas station areas that only people who are tired of driving all night can park. Lauren looked at me suspiciously, unsure if she could trust me, but she didn't question me when I held out my hand and said it would be better to come in for something hot. Her dress, wet and torn, caught the attention of those waiting for their coffee to be served. It didn't take long for me to notice. Everyone's eyes were on her, trying to guess where this out-of-place girl had come from. I made a point of walking ahead, making way for no jokes or questions. Lauren walked in right behind me, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. I ordered a double coffee and a hot chocolate, and when the waitress got too close with that curious look in her eyes, she just said, "Bring me a plate of scrambled eggs and whatever else you have." I made it clear with my gaze that this was not the time for questions. I sat down next to her, as if nothing was strange, and started chatting about trivial things, talking about trucks, the difficulty of finding a good part after a certain amount of mileage, the mandatory stops for inspection. Lauren remained silent, but seemed relieved to have a shield against outside judgment. When the food arrived, she took a while to eat, just fiddling with her fork for a few minutes, but she gradually loosened up. I asked the waitress to point me to the bathroom and handed her a bag with some clothes I had bought at a convenience store 20 minutes earlier without her noticing. A pair of loose-fitting pants, a plain gray t-shirt, and a pair of socks. It wasn't much, but it was a start. While she changed, I sat there at the table, receiving stares and hearing whispers, but I never took my eyes off the bathroom door. I only relaxed when I saw Lauren come back, now less exposed, with her hair tied up in a makeshift bun and her face washed. Coffee was one of those moments when time seemed to slow down. I tried to create a sense of normalcy, talking about the traffic on the roads, the types of people who show up when you least expect them. Lauren listened silently, but I saw a slight smile when I commented on the absurd amount of pancakes a trucker can eat after 12 hours of non-stop driving. She finally looked at her plate, took a bite of eggs, and for a moment, the weight of what she had experienced seemed a little lighter. I asked for the bill and paid without thinking twice, leaving the tip doubled just so no one would think to ask her anything. Outside, the sky was already lightening. I looked at Lauren and asked calmly, "Is there somewhere you want to go? Is there a number I can call?" She nodded slowly. Her silence said it all. There was nowhere to go, no one waiting, no chance of going back to the place where everything had fallen apart. There, on the wet sidewalk, I made the decision that I wasn't going to just turn my back or let this story end there, forgotten. She needed someone who wouldn't judge, who wouldn't give up, someone who was willing to give her more than just a ride. I knew the weight of feeling lost, and in that moment, I saw in Lauren someone who just needed a chance. What came next would require much more than just compassion. I had no idea of the consequences, but I had already decided. This story would not end as it began. From the moment we left the diner that morning, it was clear to me that Lauren needed more than just a plate of food or a place to sleep. I got straight to the point. I opened my phone's address book and started thinking about who I could really trust. My first thought was of Charlie, the mechanic who had saved me several times when my truck was about to stop in the middle of the road. I called him while he was still in the parking lot. I didn't have to explain much. I just said that I had someone who needed help, and all he said was, "Bring him here. We'll see what we can do." Charlie has always had that practical way about him, but he also had a big heart. I took Lauren to his workshop on the main street of Pine Ridge, a town of just over 7,000 people, lost among the hills and surrounded by cornfields. Charlie looked at Lauren, understood everything without needing to elaborate, and simply asked, "Do you need work or shelter first?" Her gaze wavered, so he opened the small storage room at the back of the workshop, with a makeshift bed, a simple bathroom, and an empty closet. "You can stay here as long as you need. There's plenty of work too," he said, already setting aside a pile of plates and glasses for her to wash in the makeshift kitchen he kept for his employees. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. After getting Lauren settled in, I went to talk to Martha, the owner of the diner where we had stopped. Martha had a reputation for being tough, but she never said no when it came to helping someone in need. When I asked Lauren for a temporary job, she didn't ask any questions, just said, "There's always enough dishes. If she can handle it, the job's hers." I passed the message on to Lauren, and I could see her relief and fear at the same time. Fear of not being able to handle it, but relief at having something to do, something that would give meaning to the rest of the day. The third person I approached was Pastor Rachel from the church around the corner. I'd never been religious, but I knew she ran a shelter for struggling women. Rachel met me in the back room, listened to my brief summary, and replied without hesitation, "Every woman has the right to a new beginning. I can help with night classes, so she can come learn the basics to finish high school." I passed this information on to Lauren, who was hesitant at first, but after 2 days, she accepted the invitation. The classes were simple, in a room attached to the church, with other women who also had stories of loss and survival. It was in this way, through contact after contact, that a new support network began to emerge around her. It wasn't cheap charity. It was real people making space, trusting, investing a little of their time and heart. Lauren started washing dishes in the morning and afternoon, and in the evening she went to classes. It was clear how she changed. First, she walked with her head down. Then, little by little, she started to look people in the eye, to truly thank them, to smile. With each salary she received, no matter how small, her confidence returned a little more. I also felt something was changing inside me. For the first time in many years, I saw someone rebuild a piece of their life from scratch, with minimal support. I was just planting a seed, but she was the one making the real effort, day after day. And, watching from afar, I realized that the real impact of all this was just beginning. 2 years may seem like a short time to those watching from the outside, but to someone starting over from scratch, each day feels like an eternity. I followed Lauren's every step, sometimes closely, other times only through quick messages and phone calls at the end of the month. She was never one to complain, but she always made sure to send me a sincere thank you, the kind that doesn't require anything more than a word. At the end of my sophomore year, in early May of 2022, I was invited to her graduation. The ceremony was in the gymnasium of Pine Ridge Community College, with bright lights, folding chairs, and an audience of entire families, cell phones raised, voices hushed in anticipation. Her name was called, among the first, Lauren Bennett, a social work major, on a full scholarship based on merit and achievement. I didn't just see a young woman walking across the stage. I saw someone who had walked barefoot for miles, dressed as a bride, so that she could feel in control of her own future again. After graduation, Lauren made a point of introducing me to some of her colleagues. Many had heard of her story, but no one knew the details. That same week, she began volunteering at 2 shelters in neighboring cities, and soon got a paid position at a support center for abused women. Her afternoons and evenings were filled with consultations, lectures, screenings, and occasionally participating in rescues alongside more experienced social workers. The money was small, but the return was huge. Every week she sent me stories of cases that had affected her, always reinforcing how she wanted to be for other women what I had been for her. Someone who didn't judge, just reached out and pulled them up. I watched her grow up like someone watching a child grow up. I was happy every time I received good news or a simple thank you. We kept in touch in many ways. Text messages, late-night phone calls, postcards at Christmas, and when possible, a quick coffee at Martha's Diner, now retired, where Lauren was still treated like part of the family. I could see a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there before, that mixture of pride and humility of someone who knows exactly what it took to get there. Seeing Lauren's transformation showed me that while not everyone gets the chance to start over, some people seize that opportunity with a strength that surprises even those who believed in them from the beginning. And she did, with everything she had. The night everything closed, I went back to Martha's Diner as I did from time to time, always at the end of the day, when the lights were low and there were only a few distracted customers at the counter. It was November 25th, 2022, a cold Friday, with the rain beating on the windows and the smell of strong coffee mixed with freshly baked apple pie. I had gotten used to the silence at that time of day, but that night, as soon as I walked in, I saw Lauren sitting by the window. She smiled in a way I had never seen before, calm, whole, without that weight of someone who is still running from the past. She stood up and gave me a long hug, the kind that says everything words can't. Then she handed me a thick envelope with my name handwritten on it. Inside, I found several thank you letters, some written by her, others by women she had helped, girls from shelters, college friends, even employees of the social center itself. On each page were simple, direct sentences. You saved my life without even knowing it. Your kindness came when I didn't expect anything from anyone. You taught her, and now me, that no one is alone in this world. I read each line carefully, trying not to miss any details, feeling the power of each word. We sat there talking for almost 2 hours. Lauren told me about the new stories the shelter had to tell, about plans to expand the social services to smaller towns, about girls who now dreamed of going to college. She said she kept a blue blanket in her office, just like the one I gave her that first night, just to remind her where she came from. She said that whenever someone says there's no way out, she repeats what I've heard from her. You're not broken, you're just hurt. As we left, Lauren hugged me again and said, looking into my eyes, that she would never have been able to start over without that first gesture. It wasn't just the ride, Mark. It was not judging. It was giving me time. It was giving me hope back. I thought about how easy it is to underestimate the value of the things we do without even realizing it. A blanket, a hot coffee, a leisurely conversation. Small actions can often change entire trajectories. As I walked back to the truck that night, I realized the true weight of it all. It wasn't about saving someone. It was about being available, doing your part, not turning your back on those in need. Sometimes, all someone needs is a helping hand. That phrase kept ringing in my head, a simple yet powerful reminder that no one does anything great alone. And it was there, on that rainy night, that I realized the impact of a gesture never ends. It passes from person to person, creating new stories without end. That night, as I watched Lauren leave the diner with the envelope of letters already delivered, I truly understood what remains when everything else passes. It's always about people, about the real impact of those who decide not to close the door, not to look away, not to pretend they didn't see. There's no manual for starting over. Sometimes it's just the impulse to do the least for someone who has already lost everything. It's just about stopping the truck, giving them a blanket, sharing a coffee. But most importantly, it's about not running away from discomfort. And there's no better way to show this than to see it with your own eyes. Those who have been helped also help. Those who have been welcomed learn to welcome. The lesson is simple, but many people forget. Being kind can change someone's world. It's not about great deeds, nor about having money or time to spare. It's about seeing the other person, feeling what they feel, and giving each person space to rewrite their own story. What started there, with a stop in the rain and a coffee, has become an impossible cycle to measure. Lauren continues to change lives. I continue on the road. But nothing is ever the same again once you understand the power of a small gesture. Now it's your turn. Have you ever changed someone's destiny with a simple gesture? Tell us in the comments. Share your story, because each story can be the starting point for another transformation. I want to know what you would do on that road, what you've already done, or what you'd like to do. Your experience matters, because the impact you generate can go far beyond what you imagine. I know this story has left a mark on you. Real stories like this show how much each choice matters, what true courage is, the value of stopping and listening to someone who is lost, of truly making a difference. Subscribe to the channel right now. Here, each story is an invitation to see life with more empathy and courage. Don't miss the next chapter of this community. You are already part of it just by being here. And I'm warning you now, what comes next will challenge everything you believe about hope and starting over. The next video is already on the screen. Watch it now, because you won't leave the same after hearing what I have to say.